As a child, he started by wanting to become a bus driver, changed his aspirations to being a doctor at an epiphanous moment, and was driven to become a footballer through his adolescent years. He dreamt of being a rock star during his medical college days till he realized that he had no talent for it, and finally reconciled to become a doctor after all. This is the renowned Dr. Amit Sen, a leading child and adolescent psychiatrist of India. Working with children, football and rock music, dreams and aspirations have all come together for him. Through the myriads of magical and fulfilling experiences, Dr. Sen feels that he has developed empathy over the years and can connect to children and their families. In doing so, he hopes to make a difference, however little, in their lives. Dr. Amit Sen is the director and co-founder of Children First, the leading institute for child and adolescent mental health that aims at providing clinical and developmental services, school mental health programs, community outreach, and research work. He is also the founder head of the mental health team at Salam Balak Trust, an NGO working with street children. He has been in the field for more than 30 years. His work involves psychotherapy, service development, training, awareness building, community collaboration, and advocacy in the area of neurodevelopmental difficulties in children and school mental health. He has worked with national and international organizations like the UN Human Rights Commission in the area of child sexual abuse and juvenile justice. It is a great honor to have Dr. Sen here with us today. I am certain all of us present here will be able to relate to his thoughts and benefit from them. Finding courage in times of crisis with Dr. Sen. Over to you, sir. I request the audience to type in their questions in the Q&A section so that they can be taken up at the end of the session if time permits.
Wow, thank you, Harshaditya. I'm already overwhelmed, and I'm, beginning to wonder how to take this discussion forward after having listened to our esteemed previous speaker, and indeed somebody who I admire and I've known about the hole in the wall for the longest of times. Just let me share my screen and see if I can get to the. Just a second. I'm trying very hard to. Yeah, got it. I think I got it this time. Yes. So thank you very much indeed to include me in this absolutely wonderful forum that you've created. I think Smile, as I've known it, over the last 1.5 years, has done path-breaking, inventions in education, I have to say. And I think the effects of it has been far-reaching. The other thing, if I could request some of you to switch on your cameras, because, I've been doing webinars since the lockdown began 1.5 years ago, but I still find it so hard to talk to a screen, right? So it'd be really wonderful if you could, some of you could switch on your videos and I can see your faces and talk to you rather than the screen. Yeah. So, I'm, thank you so much indeed, Harshaditya, Jugnu ma'am. Yeah. And I'm on a short break right now. I'm on the mountains, and the mountains have been our favorite place to come for short breaks. Particularly after this pandemic, it's after months that we have managed to take a break and get away from home. So you can imagine our relief and our wonder at what we see here now. As I said, I've been coming to the mountains forever. And I remember during, as I was driving up this time, I was remembering that during my teenage years and when I was a young adult, there used to be these big slogans written on the rock faces, as you climb the mountain. And one of them would say this particular slogan. It would say, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. And at that point in time, I used to find it really cool. And I thought, wow, that's a cool slogan. And I thought that I was one of those people, who would, pick up a challenge if there was one. However, as I grew up and as I started reflecting on the slogan and, what toughness or courage means, it took on many layers. I realized that toughness or courage is not just about you know being gung ho and put on a brave persona and throw caution to the wind. It's not quite like that. And what this pandemic has taught us, in recent months and the last 1.5 years, has only made that understanding much more deeper and layered. And I'd like to share some of those about what does courage actually mean during this time. And I have realized that this kind of a slogan is probably not what works during the pandemic and the lockdown. Yeah, would you agree? So uh, let's kind of let me take you through a story of one of the young persons I have actually had the fortune to get to know during this pandemic. Let's call her Riya. Riya is 15, and Riya came to us in the middle of a crisis. And what we got to know about Riya is that she was indeed a very talented all-rounder, and a very outgoing person, uh, and was, besides of course being good in academics, she was involved in all kinds of activities in school. However, she was really struggling to cope with the lockdown. And the uncertainty of board exams. So at 15, she was in grade 10. There was no certainty as to how that would pan out this year, do you know? But what happened in the middle of all this is that she lost her Nani. She lost her maternal grandmother during the second wave, and she was, of course, not very far away, in the NCR. But due to the lockdown and due to the situation, then she could not go and be with the extended family, grieve in the way that we usually want to do during such times. So and shortly after that, can you imagine that both her parents got COVID as well? So Ria got isolated in their home with her 8-year-old brother while the parents were living in two rooms that were shut. Yeah. At first, I mean, this completely shook her up from the core, and she was paralyzed with fear at first, helpless, crying often, unable to sleep. But within the next few days, up to a week or so, she started picking up the pieces and started taking care, taking hold of the household, taking care of the meals, the cleaning up, connecting with neighbors to see that they get what the bare essentials are. And she started looking after her 8-year-old brother, helping him with online classes, and also with structuring his day. She took out old books and board games, old books that their parents used to read to them, both to Ria and her brother. And she started reading it to her brother. And they started watching the cartoons they used to do when they were younger together, and that really brought back a sense of purpose in her life, and of course she also then shortly afterwards started reaching out to her cousins and friends, started playing online games, chatting, and all of that, right? And uh, what's more, she started reaching out to even friends who had had their own crises. In fact, one of her very close friends lost her mother, and another a friend's father was in the ICU. And every day she would reach out, and she understood the pain and the confusion and how sensitive the situation was for both these friends of hers, because she had gone through it herself, and she could actually tell other people not to intrude, not to push for chats, etc., because these people, while they needed the support and they needed to know that people were there for them, they also needed their personal space. And she was so good in negotiating that with the rest of the friends that they had. And of course, she was ever so thankful for the boards getting cancelled eventually, So that was Ria's story. And I wonder whether you find that despite her, initial helplessness and the crying and acknowledging that she was going through hell, absolutely, does she not come through as somebody who is full of courage? So what does it constitute? What does courage constitute during crises like this? Is something perhaps that we can think about. But before that, maybe we could take stock of what has this pandemic done to us? What kind of a crisis is this after all? I'm sure all of us go through some crisis or the other, but this is unlike any other. This is unprecedented, and I don't think any of us have ever seen a crisis like this in our lifetime. Unless, of course, you're more than 100 years old and you were there during the Spanish flu, and even then you had to be at least 10, I think, to grasp uh, what was going on. Or perhaps, some of the countries who were in the thick of the Second World War, they might have seen years of crises like this, But I don't think that it still came to signify how global this disaster is. It's reached every corner of the world. Of course, it is natural and partly man-made as well, and it is, as a result of that, it's deeply traumatic and damaging, to people's psyche, to their emotional health, and all of that. And of course, it has filled us with paralyzing fear. Some real, some imagined, and it's relentless and pervasive. It means it's got into, its homes, schools, institutions, on the streets, everywhere. Indeed, you know, and what that had done is, of course, you know uh, 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 given us a lot of fear and anxiety, no doubt, right? Uh, it's very hard to confront this reality. It's very scary indeed, and I know of so many people who talk about trying to distract themselves. They want to. Some of them have said, "I've signed off from Twitter." Others have said, "I don't watch the news anymore." Still others said that I don't, first thing in the morning, I don't check my WhatsApp messages, and I try to distract myself. I've heard it so many times, and yet, does it stay away? Does the fear and the anxiety, does it go away if you turn your head away from it, right? Actually doesn't, because it's there in the air, isn't it? Yeah, it's everywhere, and it seeps into our bodies and minds because it's there in the conversation. It hangs like a gray cloud in homes and other social spaces, doesn't it? Right? And even if you don't talk about it, it's going to get to you, right? And that's the important thing to understand, that not confronting it, not talking about it, not you know uh, facing up to it, does not completely take it away from your life, right? And if you even if you do not confront it right in head on, it still begins to seep into you and it begins to manifest in these various ways. And I'm sure many of you would have, over a period of time, perhaps experience things like not being able to sleep at night, or eating at odd hours, or craving for junk a lot of the times. And I know that these are flashpoints in many homes where parents get extremely worried when these things begin to happen with the young people at home. Lots of younger children have talked about being, getting aches and pains, feeling nauseous in the morning, not being able to get up for online schooling, feeling tired, not wanting to get out of bed. And of course, there have been mood swings, feeling always on the edge, snapping easily, feeling frustrated and angry, lashing out in anger, and regretting later. Ever so often, we find these things become a part of your lives, isn't it? Yeah. And of course, there have been fights and arguments, and there have been young people who have turned around and said, who do we trust? Who do I turn to? Because everything that you trusted, every person that you banked upon, in for perhaps no fault of their own, have not been able to be there for you. So then where do you go from there? And that has been a common refrain amongst young people that I've known. Yeah. And there have been other consequences of the lockdown. How the daily rhythm of our days, the daily life, how you woke up on Monday morning and went to school, and then you met up with friends and had your classes. Some you liked, some you didn't. You came back home, had your lunch, and then perhaps did some homework, went out to meet friends, came back, spent some family time. Monday, doesn't it seem, right? It seems that it's so, but yet this kind of rhythms and sequences that we have in our in our lives, they give us a structure, you know and they make us feel that things in our life is within our control. They're predictable, and it makes us feel safe, and we don't realize it till it's taken away. Because once this disruption happened, of course, at the beginning, if you remember the first lockdown when it happened, so many young people were so happy. Oh, there's no school, both our parents at home, we have so much family time, and we watch movies together till late in the night. But it didn't last for more than 4 to 6 weeks, if you remember, right? And everything started caving in, started coming crashing down, and the anxiety started building up, the confusion, the unpredictability of the immediate future, particularly for some of y'all who were perhaps preparing to get into high school or go to college, right? And how tough it was then to even foresee what the future might be like. And then, of course, the institutions broke down, and that included school, colleges, transport system, hospitals. Everything came to a grinding halt. Of course, I know, and I've been associated with your school to an extent, and I know how uh, well they have dealt with the pandemic, and all of you together have built a community, and pulled resources from within and from within your community to build something like Smile, which is indeed so innovative. But I don't think that e- uh, every young person was just as lucky as that. I think most people had to go through the grind in a very different way, and I've seen many young people come to me absolutely in despair, where they don't know, again, there's a who to trust. So there's been a breakdown of trust there, and also a breakdown of identity, if you can think about it like that. But what else is our identity but in places that we belong? And what is one of the main spaces that we belong in? It's our school, isn't it? It's our group of friends that we go to. It's the kind of activities we do, whether it be art or theater or play football. Those are the kind of things that constantly nourish what you want to build as your identity. And if that gets taken away, then you begin to question, who am I? And begin to have deep doubts about it. Yeah. So that is again something that we saw in so many young people. And of course, there was a complete loss of pleasure and joy, and there was a disconnect with people, purpose, and any kind of meaning in life. Yeah. So and the meaning comes from the choices that we make. You know, I mean, just to think that um, before the lockdown, most of the things that you wanted was really at a press of a button, right? Whether you wanted to meet a friend, go for a coffee, or go for a movie, or join a new music class, it was all there for your asking. You could make those choices, and that brought so much of joy and meaning, and that got taken away too, right? And as a result of that, there was a range of intense feelings that we all went through, I think, from time to time. It came in waves, and it came at different times in different people's lives, starting with frustration, helplessness, disbelief, hopelessness, deep sense of loss and grief and sadness, fear and anxiety, of course, and no doubt trauma and its aftermath. We don't have the time or the space to go into a lot of the details of this, but I'm sure most of you are probably familiar with what I'm talking about. I'm sure that either, even if you haven't gone through something like this in this intensity, you might have seen some close friends, some family members, and your schoolmate, classmates go through some of this, isn't it? Yeah. The second wave, of course, is uh, hit us, like a ton of bricks, just when we were beginning to raise our heads, just when we were beginning to, very cautiously begin to look at hope again. It came crashing down on us. And this time, while in the first wave, for many of us, COVID and the pandemic was at a bit of a distance, wasn't it? It was happening to people who were careless with things. And we felt that if we are, we do the social distancing, wear our masks, wash our hands on a regular basis, then we won't get it. And indeed, that's how it was. For most people, you would not get it if you took precautions and you do the protocol, but not in the second wave. Because in the second wave, I know of people, including the elderly, who hadn't stepped out of their homes for a year and a half, who still got it. Everybody or anybody could get it. Yeah. And that's what made it so devastating. And the death and the grief that you saw from so close. Um, I don't know of anybody who cannot talk about at least one person or maybe more people they know who have passed away, passed on. Yeah. So, and of course, things had started opening up, after the first wave the first lockdown was easing out, and, people had started stepping out, going out. The movie theaters have started opening. A lot of the extracurriculars were coming back again into their lives. Although school was not open, but now the coaching centers had opened, and bang, again, there was this place where you could not at all step out, much worse than the last time. And there was no doubt a lack of personal space, too much time with family members. Wouldn't you agree, right? And you started rubbing each other on the wrong side. There was a blurring of personal, family, and school and office spaces, wasn't there, right? And I'm sure a lot of you would agree that there was excessive screen, yeah, because screen was being used for everything: work, entertainment, social life. So hard to tease it out and say that this is useful and this is not, especially for parents who were getting increasingly anxious and thinking about screen addiction, what's going to happen, will they ever come out of this, and so on, right? I'm sure some teachers I can see are listening, and I'm sure some friends, so some of your parents are too, and I'm sure they can resonate with this, the anxieties and the fear they've gone through during this time, right? And like I said, this repeated breakdown of emerging hope, this blurred sense of future. Where are we headed? what are we, going to get after this, right? So all those kind of things had started hitting us. So, and it's important to understand this, because only then, and I think this is where, the understanding of courage has to be different, because it has to be a lot more nuanced. It has to be with a deeper understanding of what we're going through right now, isn't it? Yeah. So what is courage then, right? Is it, like I said, you know, a slogan? you know, taking it on your face and saying, "Here I am. Nothing will touch me. I'm so brave," and so on. It's not quite like that, is it? In fact, I know of people who perhaps started off like that, but then found it increasingly hard as the lockdown kept going. So in our mind, uh, yeah. So is it about conquering fear only? Perhaps it is, to an extent. It is partly to do with conquering fear, but it is a lot more than that. And we believe that courage actually is about so many different things. And this understanding, I must share with you, has come from our collaborative working with young people and families. So when we do see families and young people at Children First, we often do not take an expert position. We are not there to tell you or other people, people who approach us, what is wrong with them and how they can fix it. We indeed take a very collaborative stand where we often say to them that they are the experts uh, about their lives, on their lives. They are the experts. And we are the facilitators of helping them understand, what their strengths are, what their resources are, how they can dig in. Yeah. And that indeed is something that we often share with other people. So we often take permission from a young person or a family and take it to another young person and said, you know what? I've met another 15-year-old without taking the name. Yeah. And this is what they had to say about what they're going through. What do you resonate with this, and so on. So a lot of what I'm going to talk to you about now from here onwards is knowledge which has come from this collaborative work, right? And we believe that indeed courage has all these components to it, right? And the first thing, although it's towards the side, is acceptance, right? And then you have connect and compassion, and of course you have to be creative and adaptive. And like you all believe in your project Smile, it is to do with community. Yeah. So all these things make courage, and let's have a more nuanced, detailed look at how that would play out for us, right? Yeah. So the first thing I'm going to take up is acceptance. Yeah. Accepting of what is, the challenging times. And from the last bit of conversation I heard um, with Mr. Shugato, I could sense, I could see that um, I apologize. Yeah, just give me a second. Yeah, and suddenly things have started popping up here. I'm not anyhow. So yeah, so acceptance of the challenging times that we live in, right? And to uh, cut some slack and say that yes, it is, these are tough times, and we may not get everything perfectly right. We may flounder through things some of the times, right? We may not be able to wake up for every online class just on time. Yeah. We may not be able to do the exercise that our parents or well-wishers are asking us to do, right? It's sometimes just not possible. And that is because it is a challenging time for me, for you, for the family, for friends. And the first thing to do is to be able to accept that, right? And and uh, uh, and from there onwards, we can begin to look at some of the other things. I've clubbed compassion and creativity and adaptability for a reason. And as we go along, we'll get to know that. Compassion, of course, is again very, very important for you to connect to people in these times. Um, it is also important to understand from some of the things that we discussed uh, in terms of how this pandemic has hit us, is that in a crisis like this, when there's so much of fear and anxiety, trust and a sense of emotional well-being goes away. Yeah. You can't find it anymore, right? And if you cannot find it, then it's very hard to reach out. It's also, if you're constantly anxious and fearful inside, very hard to become creative and adaptive. So the first thing that you need to actually do is begin to create emotionally safe spaces, and that's where the creativity comes in. And it takes all of us, I think, a bit of effort, and it has to be with a stretch away from our comfort zone. Our comfort zone right now is probably just withdrawing into our own shells and not wanting to face the world, because the world is a very tough place at the moment. But if we do take the step of actually wanting to communicate again, like Ria did, then there needs to be an conscious effort to want to build these safe spaces again. We are not feeling safe now. We're feeling very unsafe. We're feeling threatened by so many different things, right? Not just the virus, but about our future, about education, about relationships that we haven't been able to nurture for so long. When school reopens, I've actually heard young people say, will I be able to talk to my friends like that, like the way I used to? Can we hang out the way that we used to? Have I lost that skill? Things like that. So compassion towards not just others, but self as well. Compassion towards self and saying that, yeah, it's all right. I haven't been able to, live up to all my own expectations, and that's okay, right? And of course, compassion for the other people. And in this compassion, being able to listen to each other. And when I say listen, it's not just about hearing, but it's listening not just through ears, but your eyes and your hearts, right? To be able to, and you know what happens when we are going through crises and when we have difficulties, difficult times, and you're sharing with somebody who cares for you. Sometimes perhaps an older person, sometimes maybe a parent or a teacher or a friend. Oftentimes they get very anxious because they want to find you a solution. They want to fix it for you, isn't it? Yeah. And you might be doing the same with some of your friends, and you might jump in and come up with suggestions even before the other person has completed what they have had to say, right? And that is where the deep listening comes in, where you stop and just soak it in, not with the aim of finding or figuring out what the solutions will be, not just with the focus of, I want to sort this for my friend, I want to sort this for my younger sibling. It may not come immediately, it might come through a lot of other reflections. At that moment, it is just about the listening, right? And then after you've listened and understood the other person's point of view, then you put your own. And that's where the collaborative approach comes. You, me, and we. And then what can we do together? And these are things that can happen when you're fighting about screen time at home. It can happen about bedtime, right? It could happen about, some friend not being reciprocating and not, answering your messages and chats, and you're getting anxious about it. And you're reaching out, and this person after 2 3 days, thumbs up, and you could either get angry with them, upset with them, or just say that, hey, what happened? This is not how you are usually, and let the other person speak, and then soak it in and say, I understand where you're coming from, but you know what, I really missed you and I need you at this time. So how can we do this together? Things like that. That's how the collaborative approach works and makes the space emotionally safe, right? Again, and you can begin to trust people again, right? And of course, being respectful towards each other, towards your thoughts, about your feelings, especially about personal spaces. And I'm emphasizing this because so many young people and adults also, and I can speak for myself, we've struggled in our families with personal spaces because there's such a lack of it. Earlier on, we could, take a walk. Again, like I said, go to a cafe, take a walk in the park, meet up with an old friend that you haven't met for a long time, take a break from each other. And that actually helps relationships to grow. Whereas if there is too much of seeing each other, sometimes it can become really ugly. Yeah. And if you're able to do some of this, creatively, um, you know, uh, make an effort to build these safe spaces again, to have the compassion towards each other, then we can begin to build trust again. Yeah. So the second or the last pair, I would say, is connect and community. So connect, of course, I'm sure, and when I club it with community, is in a way self-explanatory because it's to do with connections with people. Again, building your little families in different places again, and so on. But connection is not just with people, and that's my contention. Connection is also with nature, with the activities that you do. It is with your inner space. Yeah, like Harshad, I really liked what you talked about in the introduction, especially your metaphor of turning from metaphors to pupas now, isn't it? Yeah, and this is the time to actually withdraw and dig deep inside, isn't it? That's another kind of connection from you know, uh, connections with your own self, your own inner space, your own resources within, isn't it? Yeah. And how do you do that? Because we've lost so much of it, right? Yeah. So connecting to roots is something that we have often talked about in families and within young amongst young people, which is to do with the, the structure at home. Because as I was saying, that the external determinants, or what actually often would build the structure, like going to school and coming back, and the rhythms of daily life. In the weekend you would plan something, go out with friends or family, visit your cousins. After exams you would plan a holiday. There's so many different things that you would structure, and the institutions and the rhythms of life would actually hold it together. But we don't have that anymore. So we have to be adaptive. We have to think on our toes, and we have to figure out as to what can we do with the time that we have at home together, right? And again, this is a collective knowledge or wisdom, if you like, from different families and people we've worked with. And what we have figured is that even if you do not have such a structured routine like we used to do, we can definitely aim for a more flexible structure. And how do you do that? And some of them have come up with ideas such as that we could discuss how your new role as a student, yeah, or as a professional, or a breadwinner, or a homemaker looks like now. It's work from home, it's school from home, and it's online classes and homework. Is that all your life, being a student? Is that all you can aspire to be? Certainly not. I mean, you can make it much more creative. You can look at videos in Khan Academy. You can go and look at a great documentary in the subject that you really like. You can make a PowerPoint presentation and said, hey, I want to present this to some of my friends who have the same subject, or read a book and want to discuss it, something relevant perhaps to your curriculum, and want to discuss it with your sibling or your parent who's also interested in it. So you can make the life of a student so much more interactive and interesting. And similarly, for professionals and homemakers, they can also do that. So oftentimes, we would talk about having a drop down list of what will my day look like as a student? What are the kind of different activities that I can do? And there could be 5 to 10 different kinds of activities that fills that space. And you don't have to do every one of them every day. You can pick and choose, right? Similar to that, you can also, in these times, I'm sure that many of you have done household chores because of lack of home help and all of that. And again, tick, have a drop down list and say, I can help in these 3 4 things. You can volunteer and have that list as well. And yet again, you don't have to do it every day of the week. You can pick and choose and see where the need is. And of course, there could be family time, right? And you can again discuss what can you do as a family, and again have a list of things which you collaboratively, for together, decide that these are the few things that we can do together as a family. And once you've decided that, every evening take stock of things and say, let me see how I've done as a student, and how I've done in helping the family and with household chores, and what have I done to connect to my family. And then based on that, plan the next day and say, tomorrow is going to look perhaps a little different. I'm quite satisfied. I think I've done 60-70% of the things I set out to do, but tomorrow maybe I'll tweak it a little, makes things interesting, and yet gives it a kind of a loose structure. And with schools still not showing any signs of opening in the very immediate future. I know some of the classes are opening. I don't quite know whether your school is, but I do know of a few others where they've started opening schools for students once in a week, for a very limited time. Yeah, but it might still take a long time for it to become a good combination of offline and online, right? It still is probably, it weighs heavily on the online side, right? Yeah, and you might want to actually incorporate some of how you could make a flexible loose structure to the day, and that could make you feel quite rooted. Yeah. And of course, how do you connect to your vision, right? Because that's something that has got so mercilessly taken away. Because if you think about it, a lot of what the way we lead our lives is about our future, right? The college that we want to go to, the badminton player that I want to become, right? Or the holiday that I want to take after my board exams get over. It's all about what's going to happen then. And what we do today is based on what we're looking at, our vision. Some in the long term, some an overarching vision of who I want to become, what professional, what, you know, kind of a person I want to aspire to become, what are the values that I want to inculcate, what are the skills that I want to develop. All those kind of things bring hope, and it gives us a sense of purpose and direction. And unfortunately, in this pandemic, that's got very sort of ruthlessly taken away. Yeah. So I have, during this time, read some a particular book on this concept, this Japanese concept called wabi sabi. And wabi sabi actually is a concept which has been adopted by the West, in simply meaning that it's about imperfection. So people, buy expensive pottery, break it, and fix it again, and say this is wabi sabi. That's actually a very superficial take on it, honestly. Wabi sabi is much deeper, and it comes with centuries of Japanese wisdom, where they talk about two main things. One is that nothing is perfect. Anything that you set out to do, any person, any situation, always is, uh, has something that you can do better. It's always imperfect. So that's one. And the second thing is that nothing is permanent. Yeah. The impermanence of things, whether it's a relationship that you have, it's a certain rite of passage that you're going through while you're going from school to college. It's going to come and go. Nothing will stay, good or bad. Good times will come and go, bad times will come and go. Yeah. And to understand that firstly, nothing will stay. And indeed, if you look at it a little more deeply and closely, it empowers you, because most of the time, we are seeking perfection. Most of us are. And we are setting our, sort of expectations very, very high indeed. And when we can't beat them, we berate ourselves, isn't it? We come down heavily on ourselves. So a lot of what we think about ourselves is to do with the goals we set, and the seeking of perfection. The moment you step down from that and say that I'm going to, this is the goal, I'll try my best, but I know that I'll probably get to 70, 80% with the best of effort. And that's all right. The moment you say that, firstly, you're easier on yourself. Secondly, you always know there's scope for improvement. There's always scope to build on where you've reached. See how magical it becomes then, the moment you take that stand. And the second thing is that if something is going to be this impermanent, I better stop and engage with it, rather than just think of the future or the past. Let me live in the present, because this is not going to stay. So I better make maximum of it. So living in the moment actually comes from there. Staying with the present comes from this understanding of imperfection and impermanence, right? And I think these times, this pandemic has taught this like no other time, right? And I think that all of us have, in many ways, learned how to stay in the present and derive from the small joys of life. Yeah. So again, I mean, in because we haven't been able to connect to our future in a very robust way, we often have talked about bringing back memories and meaning, revisiting the past, rewriting our stories, so to say. So dipping into books and videos and old photographs, and bringing up those memories and re-looking at them, because most of the times we hardly find time to actually look at the pictures we've taken. How many of you would have gone for a holiday, taken loads of pictures, and never looked at them again? I mean, it happens to me all the time. And that's because we don't have the time to do it. But now we can. And we can actually begin to look at it and say, do you remember that time that we, went for a holiday with our cousins, and what a lovely time we had, in the on the beach? And to bring that back, and to uh, uh, remember those rich experiences, and perhaps in some ways, um, even reconfigure them in our own minds, which is what we call rewriting our own stories, right? Of course, making a safe social bubble, the collectives, and all kinds of different activities that you can think about. And the last thing is PQ. That's, and you'd be surprised with this term. You would have heard of IQ and EQ, I'm sure. EQ must be very high, a hot topic of discussion in your school. The PQ is playfulness quotient. Yeah. Actually, there is no measure for it, right? But we believe in it in children first. We believe that if you can bring playfulness back into our lives, especially as we're growing up, how uh, oftentimes adults would say, don't be silly, don't behave like a child. And I think um, you know, uh, that's silly. I mean, I think that's so sad that adults have lost their ability to have fun and to play, and let their hair down. And I think the more we are able to do it in these times, if we can actually be silly, if we can play and have fun, you know, and joke around, then a lot of this trauma and this anguish that we're going through is going to get minimized. And the last thing that I'm going to, touch upon before I finish is connecting to values and purpose, and indeed have the courage to question the given. And this is the time to do it, right? And indeed realize what we have done to our planet. And I'm sure, and I hope a lot of you, or most of you, would have recognized the kind of change that came about, even in the NCR, in Delhi, definitely even in the mountains and hills. I hear people talk about it here, that they could, see, small towns and cities on hilltops, which they had stopped seeing completely. But after the lockdown, the vision, the the distance into which you could look, that had changed. And we know that that happened in Delhi NCR. The pollution levels went down dramatically. Birds came out. It suddenly seemed so much greener since last year, isn't it? It gives us an impression as to what we have done to our planet, you know. And of course, we have been talking about global warming and all the cyclones and the earthquakes and all of that that have started happening with increasing frequency. So that are connected to nature and education, of course. What is education after all, and what defines success? Is it getting yourself a BMW at 25, or is it about getting a professorial post in a Ivy League, uh, or is it about saving our trees, or is it about compassion towards people who do not have as much as we do? What is success about? Redefine it, right? uh, and again, I heard Mr. Shugato mention this, that please don't go back to the normal. And I urge you to do the same. So should we seek to return to how things were, or create a new normal, right? And we have the opportunity to create something of our choice, of our intent. You know, it's not going to be easy. There'll be lots of challenges, but and that's where we hope that our younger generation, you all listening to this, hopefully, and realizing the kind of power and scope and opportunity you have, indeed you can make our world better. I think our generation has in many ways damaged it in ways that we hope that you will be able to repair. And of course, ask if less is indeed more, because we've learned, I think, to live with less. And can we do that? Can we look at that? Yeah. And rather than, going after this constant material pursuit of things, isn't it? Yeah. So with that, I'm going to stop. Uh, and I'm going to, uh, stop with this quote from one of my favorite human beings, Nelson Mandela. He said, "I learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it." I think a lot of what we have, learned during these times is to do with that. And the triumph has to come in stages. It has to come in steps. It has to be collaborative. It has to be together. And it is often to do with sensitivity, compassion, introspection, understanding, and then being able to overcome these hard times. So I'll stop here. I'll stop my screen share and I'll take some questions if you have any.
Uh, Thank you, sir. I'm sure that incredibly insightful talk must have led to a few questions rising among the students present here.
Sure.
With that, we begin the question and answer session to satisfy our thriving curiosities.
Namaste, sir.
Namaste.
Sir,
Namaste, Shaurya.
therapy and counseling are still very uncomfortable subjects for a lot of parents. So, how should we approach our parents if we feel we might need help?
Okay, that's a great question, Shaurya. See, you're absolutely right. I think the stigma about mental health and therapy and counseling has been very deep seated in our culture. And that's the last thing most often, parents will take their young people for, because they think that it's a sign of weakness. If other people get to know what will happen to the reputation of the family, and so on and so forth. There's so many different myths that go with it, right? And it also, there is a notion that if you go for a psychiatrist or a psychologist for counseling or therapy, there must be a defect in you. There must be something wrong with you deeply, and which will probably last for life. You may not be able to come out of this anymore. But again, and I'm urging this for all of you young people and other adults who are listening to this conversation, is that this pandemic has taught us that mental health challenges can affect anybody and everybody. From uh, people who were flying in their respective fields, top students ready to go to the best colleges, slightly older young adults who were ready to, embark on their, career and journey of a fantastic career, etc. So many of them have turned to us who have never ever availed of, mental health services in with symptoms of depression, of anxiety, sometimes substance use, sometimes screen addiction, and sometimes very dangerous behaviors of self-harm even, and that tells us that it's not just a small defective minority that gets mental health difficulties or who need it. It is important to understand that anybody who goes through a very stressful period, like we have done as a community, can have the need to. And if we do not address it right now, it actually might damage you in a manner that will last for years to come. On the other hand, if you address it, it will actually help you to overcome it. That's the key thing. That's the key thing. It's seen the other way. It's seen upside down. It's seen as if that if you went to a psychologist for counseling or therapy, you'll never recover from it. It's quite the opposite. You have a much better chance of understanding your own self. Dive into your own resources and help yourself then, right? And become a person that you want to be then. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. And I'm pretty sure that the teenagers present in this session will follow that advice.
And you could actually talk about this, in terms of statistics, in terms of, just to also mention that even earlier on, the prevalence or the number of young people from 15 to 25 years of age who would report symptoms of anxiety or depression were about 20 to 25%. It's a huge number, right? In this pandemic, it's gone up 5 times. So you can imagine 5 times. And these are large-scale WHO studies, which actually has corroborated this, in different countries, including ours. And that gives you an idea that certainly the majority, certainly more than 50%, if not 70, 75% young people have gone through very, very difficult times emotionally and with regard to their mental health. And it's important for our older generation to understand it. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Sir, we've heard you talk about being the invisible child, being singled out due to failures. So, how can we help friends who may be invisible in our classes?
Okay, I'm glad you have asked this question, Radhika. I'm glad that you want to do this. Yes, I have spoken about it. I've experienced it. We also work with a lot of young people who are marginalized, maybe because they have a certain so-called disability, like they may not be able to read or write that well. They may be racially different. They could, again, sometimes due to religion or the manner in which they talk. I've faced this, discrimination even due to my complexion in school, and people actually taunting me and, sometimes distancing themselves for that. So there are many factors, and it's important to understand this, Radhika, that there are some people who are more vulnerable than others, and those could be people with disability or who may have some difficulties with their gender or sexuality. Sometimes they feel very marginalized. Although the LGBTQ plus community has come up in a big way and have now a very clear voice, but still they might struggle. And equally, like people who migrate from other places, who speak a different language, who might speak English or Hindi in a different accent, and they get ridiculed and picked upon, isn't it? And it's important to first understand that, when bullying and mm, discrimination happens, sometimes it goes completely unnoticed because we are so used to it. And many times we believe that we should not get involved in this matter, right? Sometimes out of fear, sometimes because we think that it's not our business. But by being bystanders, in some ways, we are actually, um, you know, encouraging it to happen more, right? So my biggest sort of suggestion would be, don't be a bystander. If you see it happening and you can sense it, if you squirm in the way somebody is talking to another person who cannot retaliate or who doesn't have the gumption or the stature at that moment to take it up, or perhaps not, they don't have the confidence for some reason. Sometimes young people go through very difficult situations in their family. They might have lost a family member. They might be going through other transitions in the family, which are very difficult, and they can go through phases when they feel very vulnerable and they get picked upon, and to be able to stand up to them and say, this is not okay, and we have to do something about it. get it into the conversation, about what causes discrimination and how we can all collectively stand up to it. That becomes really important then. Yeah?
Thank you, sir. I'm sure many can benefit from your advice.
I hope so.
So, does seeing someone suffer have an impact on your own mental well-being? And if so, how have you grown more conscious of it and also equipped yourself to deal with it?
Yes, Sakshi, I think it can do. It can do. It depends on your relationship with the person. It depends on your own sensitivities and your own life experiences, right? In any stressful situation, if you're able to, with your resources or resources from your environment, if you're able to overcome it, you feel stronger. You become what is called more resilient, right? So if you've had experiences which has made you more resilient, you'll probably be able to deal with your friends or somebody else's suffering better, or at least not feel so vulnerable yourself, right? So you have to ask yourself, am I equipped to deal with this, right? Or should I, with the person's permission, involve somebody else who's perhaps more equipped? It could be another friend, it could be a teacher, it could be, an older sibling, whoever you think will be in a position to have that sensitivity and, ability to help, right? But that's a personal question you have to ask, that are you feeling completely helpless? Are you feeling so um, unnerved and traumatized that you just don't know what to do? Then it probably is not going to be good for you, right? But if you feel empathy, you feel the pain of this friend or whoever it might be that you're witnessing, but you know that you can help. That not only helps the other person, but also empowers you. Not just in terms of values that you become a better person, which I'm sure most of us will agree here, but you also become more resilient because you've helped a person. And that's what Riya did. When she was going through a very difficult phase, she actually reached out to other people who had also had major losses and she helped them. And that actually made her much more empowered. And this is again borne out by research that during crises and disasters, the young people who actually contribute to society and who uh, reach out to help others. And this has happened during the tsunami that we had many years ago, or the earthquake in Gujarat that happened nearly 2 decades ago. Uh, so there were workers in the mental health field who encouraged young people to come out and help rebuild the community again, to help other young people, maybe younger people even, and so on, right? And those young people, those those teenagers and young adults actually came out much better in terms of their mental health. So they then concluded that altruism during crises like this, it actually helps. If you're altruistic, if you're able to reach out and help other people. So thank you for that question, Sakshi. That's very important in these times.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any other questions, do you think? So we are almost out of time, I think. Yeah. I mean, if there is, I'll be very happy to discuss any other thing that comes up.
Yes, sir.
Jugnama.
So we can take one more question from the students, and then we have a couple of questions from the audience, if that is all right with you.
Absolutely.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Yeah, sir. So, how large of an impact do you think childhood and upbringing plays in the shaping of our personality?
Well, all the impact. So, they often say that growing up and who you become is a interaction between nature and nurture, right? So, and the jury's out about which is more important and so on. Perhaps it's 50-50, to be fair. And also with our experiences that we have, there is something that we inherit and we are born with. So I'm sure you know that we all have a blueprint, and each one of us can do certain things well and not be comfortable with certain other things. But what shapes all those things, what interacts with that template, is the environment outside. So upbringing, parenting, the family that you grow up in, the school that you grow up, go to, the friends that you have, they have deep impact in the way you grow up. Whether it is in terms of how you feel about yourself, right? Whether you feel good about yourself, the kind of skills you develop, is also dependent on the environment you get, opportunities you get, right? And the sense of identity you have due to the belongingness. I belong here. This is my school. These are the values that they stand for. And they then become your own, isn't it? And you carry them for years to come. You might want to question them from time to time. And you always have that opportunity. But for the first 25 years of your life, I can tell you, and indeed adolescence lasts till 25, the environmental factors play a huge, huge role in shaping who you are.
I totally agree, sir. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you, Shaurya. Yeah.
So the ideas that you expressed are so true and relatable. I mean, we are all facing this and going through this. The Riya that you mentioned, I think we have come across her, and we in parts are also, facing the same issues that you mentioned she is facing, and maybe coping with the same things. So it has been a
Thank you,
very
Sundar.
very interesting and very relatable session. So yeah. So now we'll move on to the audience question. The first question is that usually we see adults manifesting their stress and anxiety in many ways, but the same does not happen with children. They seem to internalize it and thus suffer more. So what can be done for in such cases?
So I think the awareness that children can respond differently is the first thing that is most valuable. As I was saying that, fear, anxiety can manifest in different ways, from, the sleep cycle and the food habits going completely all right, to having, multiple physical symptoms of, a loss of energy and exhaustion, to having mood swings, many times, mood swings, back chatting, being on the edge, lashing out, banging doors, sometimes when it becomes even more, throwing things or getting into big fights at home, and so on. And unfortunately, what happens is that usually the focus becomes the behavior. And because the behavior from an adult point of view is not right, and they might see it as being disrespectful or rude or disruptive, or what kind of a human being are you turning out to be, and so on. It could be to do with values. What adults often miss out on is the underlying feeling. So the behaviors don't come alone. There's always something happening underlying inside the young person, which manifests as a behavior, isn't it? Which triggers the behavior. And if we are able to identify, if we are able to connect to that feeling, take a step back and say, oh my God, you seem extremely upset and angry. What made you so? You're not usually like this. Can we talk about it? So creating that emotionally safe space that I talked about during that, during our previous, discussion a few minutes ago, is to do with that. If we are able to create a space where children and young people can talk without feeling judged, without feeling admonished or rebuked or scolded or punished, not get consequences, then they are able to begin to get in touch with their feelings and express them. And that's crucial. Yeah. So don't go on the behavior is what I would suggest to adults, but look, beneath it. Stop for a moment and don't react and respond to just the behavior and try to discipline your child and correct your child prematurely. But stop and ask, what is it that's making you behave like this? What are you feeling? You must be feeling terrible to say those things to your mother, for instance, right? Yeah. And then the young person might break down and talk about their, inner world, how frustrated they might be or how desperate they're feeling in these times. And that's a window to their inner world, right? And we must know as adults how to connect with them.
Absolutely, sir. But at the moment of defiance, it is very difficult for an adult not to react. Oftentimes, we resort to reaction. Although, in our right frame of mind, we may not do that, as you suggested. But yes, that's a difficult thing to learn also.
It is. So I think that when, as parents, as teachers, as adults who work with young people, we grow up as well. I think my biggest growing up days after my, childhood and adolescence has been as a parent. And I have had to repeatedly step back and tell myself, that's not the way to talk to your child, right? And to be able to say that acknowledge and even go and apologize and say, I'm so sorry I spoke to you like that. That was not called for. I came from my own frustration. And I'm sorry, I was really anxious. That's why I spoke like that. I apologize to you. And to do that genuinely, I think adults need to learn to apologize and to connect to young people like that. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
I've done that
They
multiple
don't
times
come
with
with
my
a
own children.
manual.
No.
Yes, they don't come with a manual. So yes,
They
we
don't.
also have to learn. So the other question is, can you suggest a few books that can help parents equip themselves to handle stress and anxiety among children?
The one that we use often in all our trainings, etc., is a book called All You Need Is Love, The Art of Mindful Parenting. It's written by Dr. Shailaja Sen, and it's readily available. That's one book that we use as a template often when we talk about parenting, and even sometimes when we talk about when we work with schools, we use that. So it's called the 5C model, and I have used it here as well. Partly. So the connect, and part of that I've taken from that book and those ideas. So I think that could be a great resource, right? And besides that, there are of course umpteen number of books which talk about how to understand difficult behaviors in children, and how again, like I was saying, not to just look at the behaviors but to understand where it's coming from, right? Again, there's another book called The Difficult Child, and I forget the author, but again, that's something that we have read a few years ago as we were training and stuff like that. And that it's again, a difficult child, a child who challenges you. There's much more to the child than what you see outside. Yeah, and it's important to understand that. Yeah.
Thank you so much, sir. There's so many nuggets of wisdom that we take away from this session with you. Thank you for sharing all of this information with us.
Not at all. It's been my pleasure interacting with all of you. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to this absolutely wonderful forum. And I hope you all the success, and I hope you are able to, no doubt take care of yourself, but also, be in that introspective space, individually, collectively, and please help us, find a better tomorrow. And that'll be my message to all the young people who are listening today. I think they will give us a second chance. I think we've spoiled our earth in many different ways that only they can resurrect. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Dr. Sen, thank you. I've hijacked this from a teacher just to, personally thank you. I know you are in the hills. I know you were on vacation, but really you've been a true smile ambassador through the year. So thank you for taking the time out to be with us today. I think both adolescents and adults, have been inspired by you, and I think they're, like ma'am said, taking back a lot of nuggets from you. So thank you for taking out this time for us.
Not at all, Charu ma'am. It's been my pleasure. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. I started this session by saying that I was certain that we would be able to relate to Dr. Sen's thoughts and benefit from them. And I think we can all agree that Dr. Sen has done that for us. His perspective on the effects of the pandemic has let us all know that we were and are not alone in our struggles through this time. And his understanding of courage, based off of the themes of acceptance, compassion, connection, and community, I am sure has helped us all get a hold of how we can make it through this deadly pandemic better than we were before. Our sincere gratitude to Dr. Sen for being with us today. I'm certain that each one of us here, no matter where we've come from or what we've been through, have found something relevant and profound in your words. In these unprecedented times, I'm sure your words have found a new light for all of us.
Thank you, Harshaditya. Thank you so much indeed. Bye then. I'll take your leave. Bye. Namaste.